tri-platform Capacitor apps, or React Native apps for that matter, they always look wonky and weird. Not always, but most of the time. I'd say like 99% of the time. They look really off. They look like old weird websites that somebody somehow shoehorned into being an app. And they feel really weird when you open them up on the App Store, load them up on your phone, and they don't feel at all native. And it's not that they can't have a more native-like feel, but they don't. So why is that? And what can we do about it? Well, the projects I've been involved with that have had this issue, almost in all cases have been designed as like a open-ended design project, meaning there weren't many constraints put on it at the beginning related to the user interface. And so designer goes and designs and makes whatever they think looks good, sells it off to the client, and that moves up or down the food chain. And eventually you have built out the designer's vision. That probably doesn't look a lot like a normal native app. So I worked on another project, I won't say what, but they had both native developers, both Android and iOS. And I think this changes things. One, just to have that infrastructure, but you don't need it. But because native developers really care about their platforms and the UI and the experience, they tend to kind of fight and argue for it to be done in the Android way or in the iOS way. So what can we do in lieu of that with small, fast, quick projects where we don't have time to build out a whole design system and refine everything and make everything perfect? Well, a couple of things. The biggest thing is to inject in your process that of looking at the constraints first for those particular platforms. By doing this, you can identify which things are radically different and which things are not. I already know from experience the things that are typically different is the text. It can be different on both. They're using different fonts, a little bit different size or styling. So that's one thing. You need to build a design that allows and accounts for that. And buttons. The buttons look and feel different. So in order to create a native-like experience, for example, in Capacitor, which doesn't allow you access directly to the native buttons, you have to build in CSS buttons that look and feel and use the correct fonts, much more similar to the native experience. And I think it's not that hard to emulate that because there's plenty of examples and you can very easily emulate that. So what's the other thing that's quite different? The other thing that's very different is the navigation patterns. So menus, even if you're using them, breadcrumbs and things like this. These are the things that are quite different. So if you go and take some effort and build not a full-on design system, but a design that can account for two types of text approaches, two types of buttons, and two types of navigation systems, then you're going to get very close to that native look and feel. And one other thing you got to watch out for is to take a look at other apps and also the UI guidelines and make sure the other aspects of your design are not making it feel heavy or very far off from normalized apps you would find in that platform. Now that's great if you're creating a dual platform Capacitor app, but What if you're going to go crazy and create tri-platform? Tri-platform means same code, you write it once, it works everywhere. Also on the web. Well, this is the other place I've seen these fail. And what happens is that usually the web interface is also not thought of. So even though you might have patterns that have been quite invented from, say, what you might see if you look at the UI guidelines, when you take those patterns or even native patterns for iOS and you put them on the web, those are also going to feel just as weird and just as off. So if you intend to do a tri-platform app, same thing. Fonts, or not the fonts, but the text, buttons, and navigation patterns. You have to rethink those and make them feel web native. So do you need a full-on design system for this? No, I don't think so. If you're designing in Figma, how do you approach it? Well, you create some variants, right? You have an iOS variant, you have your Android variant, and then you have a web variant. And you could easily just start with one and then build off the other ones. But this is what's needed. And when you write it in Capacitor as a developer, you'll have a switch statement or something like that. And for these particular patterns, you just switch to use different components that are mapping to those Figma designs. Anyways, if you're thinking about using Capacitor or React Native or some other hybrid approach, I hope this helps you think about how to start the project, how to organize the design, and how to pull it off so it's going to look fantastic. Thanks for watching.